The morning of September 11th, 2001, began like any other Tuesday in New York. The sky was crystal clear, a deep blue that contrasted perfectly with the skyscrapers of Manhattan. It was one of those perfect early autumn days, when summer hadn't completely given way to the cold, and the city hummed with its characteristic energy. Executives were rushing with their coffee as they walked to work. Taxi drivers honked in the congested streets, and in the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, thousands of people began yet another routine day on the 110 floors of each tower. Mohammed Atta woke up early that morning in Portland, Maine, at 33 years old. The Egyptian had an objective that was about to transform the world. He and 18 other men had spent months, some even years, meticulously planning every detail of an operation the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda called Operation Plains. Atta was the leader of that group of terrorists, and his heart pounded not with nervousness, but with fanatical determination as he boarded the morning flight to Boston. At 7:59 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 took off from Boston's Logan International Airport bound for Los Angeles. Aboard were 92 people, including 11 crew members and 5 hijackers led by Atta. 16 minutes later, at 8:15 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 took off from the same runway, also bound for Los Angeles, carrying 65 people and another 5 terrorists. At that moment, no one could have imagined that those planes would never reach their destination, and that the fuel they carried to cross the continent would become part of a weapon of mass destruction. At 8:14 a.m., while the first plane flew over inland Massachusetts, Atta and his accomplices began the hijacking. Armed with box cutters, small blades that had gone unnoticed by airport security, they stormed the cockpit, murdered the pilot and co-pilot, and took control of the aircraft. Flight attendants managed to make desperate calls to the airline's base, reporting the hijacking, but it was too late. Mohammed Atta had already turned off the plane's transponder and drastically changed its route, now pointing directly toward the heart of Manhattan. Betty Ong, a 45-year-old flight attendant, managed to make a call that would later be described as one of the most important and agonizing in aviation history. In a calm but clearly shaken voice, she reported, "The cockpit is not responding. Someone has been stabbed in business class, and I think we're being hijacked." Her words would be forever recorded in the American collective memory as one of the first alerts of the tragedy to come. In the World Trade Center, the day continued its normal routine. Cantor Fitzgerald, a financial services firm that occupied floors 101 to 105 of the North Tower, had 658 employees already at their stations. In offices spread across the 2 towers, approximately 17,400 people were at their desks, in meetings, or having coffee in common areas. Some looked out the window admiring that perfect blue sky. No one imagined that, in a matter of minutes, that quiet morning would transform into a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. If you are following this story and want to understand how historical events can change the world, leave your like this as an account that must not be forgotten. At 8:46 a.m., time seemed to stop. American Airlines Flight 11, traveling at approximately 490 miles per hour, 790 kilometers per hour, slammed into the north face of the World Trade Center's North Tower, between the 93rd and 99th floors. The impact created a hole about 100 feet 30 meters wide in the building's structure. The jet fuel, loaded for a transcontinental journey, instantly exploded, creating a fireball that engulfed several floors. The impact was so violent that people in offices miles away felt their buildings shake. For those on the streets of Manhattan, the world suddenly lost its meaning. The noise was deafening, a metallic roar followed by an explosion that echoed between the skyscrapers like artificial thunder. Thousands of eyes turned upward, to that tower now bleeding black smoke and fire. Twisted metal, shattered glass, and papers began raining down from the sky like a macabre shower. People on the street ran in all directions, some looking for shelter, others simply paralyzed by shock, unable to process what their eyes were seeing. On the floors hit and above the impact, approximately 1,360 people were immediately trapped. The stairwells were destroyed or blocked by debris and intense fire. Temperatures on those floors quickly rose to unbearable levels. Some desperate people began breaking windows in search of breathable air. The building's communication systems were severely damaged, leaving many unaware of what was happening or what they should do. Jules and Gédéon Naudet, 2 French documentary filmmakers who were filming a documentary about the daily life of rookie firefighters in Manhattan, captured the first impact. Their cameras happened to be rolling, filming a routine call to check a gas leak. The audio captured clearly shows the moment of impact, a growing roar, followed by the sound of the collision and the shocked screams of the firefighters. Those images would become some of the most important historical documentation of the event. In the first few minutes after the impact, the confusion was total. Many thought it had been a terrible accident, perhaps a small private plane, or a helicopter. The idea that a commercial Boeing 767 had been deliberately flown into the building seemed absolutely impossible. Television stations interrupted their normal programming, and reporters were quickly dispatched to the scene. News cameras began live broadcasting images of the burning tower, and millions of Americans stopped what they were doing to watch, still not comprehending the magnitude of what was happening. 17 minutes after the first impact, while the world was still trying to process what had happened to the North Tower, the second act of that coordinated tragedy was about to unfold live before the eyes of millions of people. The day that began with a perfect blue sky had turned into a nightmare, and the worst was yet to come. At 9:03 a.m., 17 minutes after the first impact, while television cameras around the world were pointed at the burning North Tower, the unthinkable happened before the eyes of millions of live viewers. United Airlines Flight 175, also hijacked after its takeoff from Boston, emerged in the blue Manhattan sky from the south, flying at over 560 miles per hour, 900 kilometers per hour. In a maneuver that demonstrated deliberate training, the plane banked slightly before colliding with the south face of the South Tower, between the 77th and 85th floors. The explosion was even more devastating than the first. The angle of impact and the higher speed caused the plane to slice through the building even more destructively. With debris shooting out the opposite side of the tower, an orange and red fireball exploded out of the building, followed by a cloud of thick black smoke. At that moment, any doubt about the nature of those events was instantly eliminated. The world understood, with growing horror, that it was witnessing not an accident, but a coordinated terrorist attack of unprecedented proportions. In the streets of Manhattan, panic set in completely. The second impact confirmed everyone's worst fears. People ran desperately, some still looking back at those two towers that were now pillars of fire and smoke against the blue sky. The noise was deafening: ambulance sirens, fire trucks, police cars, news helicopters, and above all, the screams of thousands of terrified people. Dust and debris continued to fall from the sky like toxic snow, coating streets, cars, and people with a gray layer of pulverized concrete, glass, and charred paper. Inside the towers, the scene was one of absolute despair. In the South Tower, the impact was on lower floors than in the North Tower, which meant even more people were trapped above the impact zone. Approximately 600 people on the upper floors had no way down. The stairwells were blocked, the heat was unbearable, and the toxic smoke made the air unbreathable. Some people, in acts of extraordinary courage, tried to help injured colleagues, improvising stretchers with office chairs and doors ripped from their hinges. Telephones rang incessantly. Workers trapped in the towers made desperate calls to family, friends, and 911. Some of these calls were recorded and later became some of the most painful documents in American history. People said goodbye to their loved ones, whispered words of love, asked for messages to be delivered to their children. There was a surreal calm in many of those voices, resigned acceptance in the face of the inevitable, mixed with an urgent need to say the words that mattered before it was too late. Kevin Cosgrove, vice president of Ione Corporation, was trapped on the 105th floor of the South Tower. His call to 911 was later released and became one of the most agonizing recordings of that day. In a controlled but clearly terrified voice, he provided information about his location, the number of people with him, and the smoke seeping through the door cracks. "Tell my wife and kids I love them," he told the operator, before the line went dead forever. This real story touched millions of hearts. If you believe we should remember and honor these victims, leave your like and share. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the country, the other two hijacked planes continued their deadly courses. At 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77, which had taken off from Washington Dulles International Airport bound for Los Angeles, crashed into the West facade of the Pentagon, the heart of the American defense system. The plane, flying at low altitude and high speed, struck the building on the first floor, penetrating 3 of the structure's 5 rings. The resulting explosion killed 125 people inside the Pentagon, in addition to the 64 aboard the plane. The attack on the Pentagon carried powerful symbolism. If the World Trade Center represented the economic power of the United States, the Pentagon was its military might. The terrorists' message was clear: no symbol of American power was safe. But for Al-Qaeda planners, there was still a fourth target, possibly the most symbolic of all. United Airlines Flight 93 had taken off from Newark, New Jersey, bound for San Francisco, but 42 minutes late due to runway congestion. This seemingly insignificant delay would prove crucial. When the four hijackers took control of the aircraft at 9:28 a.m., the 33 passengers and 7 crew members had already heard about the attacks in Newark and Washington through phone calls they managed to make using the seatback phones. Todd Beamer, a 32-year-old software consultant, was among those passengers. After making a call that connected him to a phone company operator, he learned about the other attacks. When he realized that his plane was being used as a weapon, Todd and other passengers made a decision that would go down in history. They would vote democratically on whether to try to retake control of the plane. Jeremy Glick, Mark Bingham, and other passengers joined the plan. Todd Beamer's last words, captured by the operator, would become a rallying cry. "Are you guys ready? Okay, let's roll." The passengers attacked the hijackers with everything at their disposal: beverage carts, fire extinguishers, boiling water. Black box recordings captured the Arabic screams of the terrorists as they tried to maintain control of the plane, realizing they would lose control of the aircraft. And with the Capitol or the White House still minutes away, the hijackers made a final decision. At 10:03 a.m., they plunged the plane into the ground in an open field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Flight 93 crashed at over 560 miles per hour, creating a crater more than 30 feet 10 meters deep. The impact was so violent that the plane was literally disintegrated, with debris scattered over an area of square miles. Everyone aboard died instantly, but their courage had saved countless lives in Washington. Later investigations suggested that the likely target was the United States Capitol, where hundreds of congressmen and senators would have been in session. Back in Manhattan, at 9:59 a.m., something engineers swore was impossible began to happen. The South Tower, which had been hit later but on lower floors where the structural load was greater, began to collapse. It started with a muffled roar that shook the earth. The upper floors, weakened by the intense fire that had melted the supporting steel beams, began to give way. Within seconds, 110 stories of steel, concrete, and glass began to fall in upon themselves in a catastrophic chain reaction. The collapse of the South Tower created a cloud of dust and debris that surged through the streets of Manhattan like a gray, deadly tsunami. People ran desperately trying to escape that wall of destruction that engulfed everything in its path. Firefighters, police officers, and first responders who were on the lower floors of the tower and in the surrounding areas were caught by surprise. Many were swallowed by the debris cloud. Visibility dropped to zero. Day turned into night in a matter of seconds. When the dust finally began to settle, it revealed an apocalyptic landscape. Where one of the world's tallest towers once stood, there was now only a smoldering mountain of twisted wreckage. The South Tower was gone, taking with it all the people who were still trapped on its upper floors, and many of the first responders who were trying to save them. The world watched, completely stunned, unable to process the magnitude of that destruction. But the nightmare was not yet over. The North Tower, which had been hit first and burned longer, was still standing, but not for much longer. Following the collapse of the South Tower, a desperate race against time began in the North Tower. Fire commanders, realizing the unprecedented danger, issued an order for the immediate evacuation of all first responders. However, communication was chaotic. Many radios failed inside the structure. Despite the peril and the order to retreat, hundreds of firefighters were still ascending the stairwells, carrying up to 66 pounds 30 kilograms of equipment, determined to reach the hundreds of people known to be trapped above. Battalion Chief Oreo Palmer and Fire Chief Joseph Pfeiffer were among those who reached the highest floors. Their final communications, later recovered, showed professionals focused on assessing the situation and planning rescue strategies. They were operating with tremendous courage, unaware that the structural integrity above them was rapidly failing. In the streets around Ground Zero, as the area became known, the chaos was profound. Thousands of people, coated in gray dust, wandered the streets in shock. The air was thick with pulverized materials, and the immediate environment was dominated by silence mixed with desperation. Abandoned items, including shoes, littered the ground as people fled the scene. At 10:28 a.m., exactly 102 minutes after being struck, the North Tower began its total collapse. The sound was immense, likened to 1,000 passing trains. The structure fell in a catastrophic chain reaction, sending a vast cloud of debris and dust across the surrounding area. The collapse claimed the lives of the remaining trapped workers and many firefighters, police officers, and first responders who had stayed inside to save lives until the final moment. Father Michael Judge, chaplain for the New York Fire Department, spent the morning administering support and comfort to those in distress. He was tragically overcome by debris in the building's lobby during the collapse of the North Tower. His image, being carried from the scene by comrades, became a potent symbol of sacrifice. He was officially recorded as the first fatality of the attack victim 0001. This is a story of tragedy, but also of unparalleled heroism. Honor the memory of these heroes with a like and subscribe so we never forget. When the dust finally settled hours later, the landscape was unrecognizable. The iconic Manhattan skyline was permanently altered. Where two majestic towers had once stood, there were now only vast, smoking piles of wreckage. World Trade Center 7, a 47-story building nearby, was severely damaged and later collapsed at 5:20 p.m. Other complex buildings were also destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The death toll was staggering. Nearly 3,000 people lost their lives. This total included 2,753 people at the World Trade Center, among them 343 firefighters and 71 police officers, 184 people at the Pentagon, and all 40 passengers and crew on Flight 93. Victims came from all backgrounds and included high-level executives, custodians, and citizens from over 90 different countries. In the hospitals of New York, medical staff waited for a wave of injured that never materialized. Due to the catastrophic nature of the collapses, the vast majority of people were either killed instantly or managed to escape with minor injuries. Only 18 people were rescued from the debris. Rescue operations soon became recovery efforts, searching for the remains of victims to offer families closure. In the days and weeks that followed, thousands of workers labored tirelessly at Ground Zero. These first responders, construction workers, and volunteers dug through the debris under hazardous conditions. Many of these brave individuals would later face severe long-term health issues, including respiratory illnesses and cancers, due to exposure to the toxic dust, a tragic ongoing consequence of the attacks. The individual stories of heroism from that day are boundless. Wells Crowther, a 24-year-old equities trader, repeatedly guided groups of people to safety before going back up to help others. Distinguished by his red bandana, he was last seen moving upward, saving lives. Rick Rescorla, head of security for Morgan Stanley, calmly and effectively evacuated his firm's 2,700 employees from the South Tower, saving nearly everyone, before returning to the building to ensure no one was left behind. He did not survive. The psychological impact of 9/11 on America and the world was profound. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, the American mainland was attacked. The feeling of invulnerability evaporated instantly, and the world was fundamentally changed. The political consequences were seismic. President George W. Bush declared a war on terror. The U.S. soon invaded Afghanistan and later Iraq. Security laws changed dramatically, exemplified by the Patriot Act, and the Department of Homeland Security was created. The world entered a new era of focus on terrorism and national security. Yet, the most enduring legacy of 9/11 is how that day revealed the best of humanity. Americans united across all backgrounds. Thousands volunteered to donate blood. Millions contributed to relief funds. The city of New York showed extraordinary resilience and solidarity. Today, the 9/11 National Memorial stands where the towers once dominated the skyline. Reflective pools mark the tower's footprints, with waterfalls and the victims' names engraved in bronze. Above it, One World Trade Center rises 1,776 feet, 541 meters, symbolizing that America, though wounded, remains standing. Every September 11th, ceremonies are held to remember not just the tragedy, but the acts of courage, sacrifice, and community that emerged from the ashes. The story of 9/11 is ultimately one of unimaginable loss, but also of the strength of the human spirit. It showed that even when confronted by the deepest hatred, courage, compassion, and hope can prevail. Never forget.